Welcome to the Pursuit of Myself, the podcast. Here we take ownership of our healing. We rewrite the rules, we turn knowledge into wisdom, and we lead our lives with intention. I'm your host, Rayne, and it's my mission to empower you to get back into the driver's seat of your life. So she did everything right. She followed the rules. She built the life that she thought would make her happy. And yet, here she is, unhappy, burnt out, disconnected, unsure of who she is. She feels numb. She doesn't know where to turn. Does this sound familiar? This episode is for the woman who's quietly grieving a life that was supposed to be the thing, that was supposed to be it, but isn't. The woman who feels lost inside her own story. The woman who feels shame inside her own story. The woman who ticked all the boxes and still ended up aching. So what happens when the path you were told to walk leads you to a place that doesn't feel like home? Today, we are going to dive deep into grieving the life we thought would make us happy. Let's go. So there is this silent grief that no one talks about. And that's grieving this perfect life that just wasn't so perfect. We thought that when we got married, got the house, had the job, had the children, the life that really looks good on paper, that one that so many women and I suppose men as well would strive for. When it doesn't eventuate, what do we do? When it doesn't happen the way it was supposed to, when it doesn't bring you the joy that it was supposed to, you keep thinking, but this should be making me happy, right? And it's interesting in this world of grief because I guess it's not a tangible thing. Grief isn't just for death. It is for when we are setting ourselves up for this big picture, for this big fantasy, and it doesn't actually eventuate, we get to move through the process of grieving this life that we thought would actually light us up, that we thought would be for the rest of our lives. The life that would give you, let's say, the status, the life that would give you an important role, or even meaning wherever you sit in your society at the moment. And when this doesn't eventuate, what happens? We just sit, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades, thinking, well, you chose this, so deal with it. And any other thought is shame and guilt. But what if we actually gave ourselves permission to grieve? To grieve in that process of, this is what I wanted, this didn't eventuate. So I honestly believe it's in the grieving process that we get to bring ourselves back to the present. And whether you are here because you're wanting to repair a relationship, whether you're wanting to find deeper connection in your marriage, or whether you're trying to or wanting to heal from a marriage that didn't turn out the way that you thought it would, there is always space for us being super honest and present with ourselves about what we wanted and what hasn't eventuated, so that we can make the repair in these moments. We can pivot in a way that is right for us. And as I said, this isn't just for grieving the life that you thought would make you happy. Maybe you're in a relationship, maybe you're in a marriage at the moment and you feel it's not going in this fantasy direction. Well, we get to also grieve in that marriage. And in that grief, we can bring us back to the present moment and start reframing and pivoting. Okay, what could this look like for me in these beautiful boundaries and in the confines of the marriage that I've chosen, rather than sitting there dwindling away, sitting in shame and guilt and not giving air and not giving intention to the way you're actually feeling right now. Everything that we do is about self-awareness, and that includes being aware of where our fantasies are, where our dreams are, where our programming is. And if it doesn't, our expectations are not being met. We get to grieve that so that we can start creating a new base, a new foundation for which we can build on. Now, this grief doesn't actually mean that you're failing, right? It doesn't mean that you are a bad girl. It doesn't mean that you haven't done what you were supposed to do. And that is exactly where our brain and our body take us. But you are not crazy for feeling like this, and you are absolutely not broken. Sometimes what it takes is just you deciding that you're going to actually feel the truth and feel the emotions, sometimes that you've been covering up for years. When we start to feel where we're at, we begin in a very interesting place, because there is a place we can hold deep gratitude for exactly the things that we have achieved. We can hold deep gratitude for our marriage, or a marriage that hasn't eventuated, the time that we were there. We can hold deep gratitude for our children, for the house, for the things that we have, for the things that we've built. But also, when that doesn't eventuate to the way and the expectation that we want, we are allowed to hold this grief for what could have been. There is a duality of life that I don't believe a lot of people actually allow themselves to feel, right? And in this case, it might be gratitude for the experience and for the gifts that have been given, but also grief if it hasn't eventuated the way that our expectations, the way that we have put on ourselves, or the way that we wanted it to unfold. Now, the question I want to ask you in this moment, and you get to reflect on this also, whose story were you creating and living by when you started to build this life that you thought would make you happy? Okay, there's a very good reason why I asked that question. And I want you to know, and I know that a lot of you already know this, but I really want to dive a little bit deeper into what this actually means. As when we are born with generational programming, we are born with generational traumas, we are born with societal expectations, we are born, all into different environments with different parents. We could even go a little bit deeper here, because there are so many studies now to show that trauma can be passed on through generations, sometimes up to, I think it's 7 or 8 generations back. And I find that really interesting. Not that we have to dive back into our 7 or 8 generations back of trauma, but it does give you an idea that where you are right now is not all of your choosing. And when we can really understand and integrate that into our bodies, we get to hold ourselves with compassion. We get to hold ourselves in this, oh, I get it moment, rather than a harsh judgment for where we are today. So all the programming, conditioning that was put on you, whether that is to get married, whether that is to get a job at uni, or go to university and get a degree, whether that's to you must buy a house, whether that's you must start having kids by a certain age, whether that's you're approaching 30 and you're still single. There are so many subconscious beliefs that shape our expectations of the future of how we should be, right? So if you can have a look at all the programming you've had as a child, and I'm not just talking about parents, I'm talking about, movies and, school, and the list absolutely goes on. When we can bring awareness to those subconscious beliefs that have been imprinted in us for a young age, you can start seeing how and why your life has unfolded the way it is. And this is not about making anything wrong or right. And this is not about whether we've bucked the trend or whether we've conformed to what society wants of us. The subconscious beliefs that shape the expectations of our future are where we start to look so that we can hold ourselves in compassion. Because what I see so many women doing, instead of feeling this grief, we go to shame and guilt because our expectations have not been met. So are they really our expectations, or are they expectations that we believe others have put on us and we need to hold accountable for them? Now, the reason this is so important is because self-awareness precedes choice. When we are blindly in survival mode, when we're in fight or flight, when we are not feeling our emotions, we have no self-awareness as to where we're actually feeling, who we actually are. So self-awareness precedes choice. When we are aware of our conditioning, our background, our feelings, how we're showing up, we then get to see ourselves with compassion so that we can choose again. Because we inherit these belief systems. We inherit what success actually means, whether it's, as we said, buying a house, getting a degree at uni, getting married, having the kids. We inherit belief systems and we make them mean something about us. We as human beings want to feel like we are part of something. We want to feel like we're part of a family, of a group. Us as humans require connection. And from a very young age, we learn how we're going to get that. So anything outside of acquiring connection in our society, from our parents, from our groups, from school, anything outside of that can feel really confronting. So I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and she delayed about 8 years coming out to her parents as gay. And when we reflected on that, she honestly said it's not because she thought that they would reject her. It's not because she thought that they, would be upset or angry. But the big disappointment for her was that she thought that she was going to disappoint society. She was going to disappoint herself that she wasn't part of society's rules. Now, when we really sink into that, the abandonment of self because we want to fit in, because we want to work by society's rules, that runs so deep. And the reason I'm actually hashing on about this is because we can convince ourselves that we are not meeting expectations of others, not expectations of society. But when we really knuckle down to the way that we were brought up and what is expected of us, we are really disappointing ourselves. We really avoid making decisions. We avoid moving through life because we don't want to feel like we're disappointing ourselves. We don't want to feel like we've made the quote unquote wrong choice. We don't want to feel like the way that our life was going is not what we intended to. So we knuckle down and we keep going. And this is where I feel so many women stay stuck. It's like, I know who I am, but I can't actually be who I am because I'm going to be abandoned. I'm going to be a bad girl. And if I do that, will I be loved? And the cycle continues over and over again. We chase this white picket fence. We chase this fantasy, the family, the career, the holidays, trying to do it all right. And we spend years and years living for everyone else. And then you wake up and it's like, now you're here, wondering why I still feel like I'm not enough. Why do I still feel like a failure? Why can I not face myself? Why can I not feel my feelings? And when we go into this state, when we really allow ourselves to go, I am unhappy, the brain goes, okay, so let's wipe everything out of our lives and let's start again. I wanted to preface that. I want to bring that to the attention because that is actually not what has to happen. We don't have to wipe out our whole life so that we can grieve a fantasy that may or may not never come true. What we do have to do, though, is give ourselves permission to start feeling, to give ourselves permission to stop avoiding feeling, to give ourselves permission to find out who we are whilst in the constraints of the life that we are in right now. But when we are striving for this fantasy and it is not coming to fruition, we get to feel the grief that feels inside of our body. Bypassing that grief, pretending it doesn't exist, pretending that everything's okay, is where we then sit in shame, we sit in guilt, we sit in resentment, And I promise you, it's from that place that everything falls apart. The grief doesn't require everything to fall apart, because the grief says, I am connected to a fantasy that is not eventuating. Okay, where am I at right now? Let's bring us back to that present moment so that I can work with what I have right now. The shame and guilt will keep you spiraling to the point where everything does have to break down, because you can't see past the shame and the guilt of feeling a certain way. So what I want to drive home in this right now is that grieving is absolutely essential if you want to start cleaning the slate, cleaning the energy in whatever situation you are in, so that you can start rebuilding without having to completely crash down your whole life. So I often, well, maybe not often, but over the years, I have done a lot of reflecting on my personal story and my personal programming. So my dad was a quote unquote footballer. He was many, many things, but this is something that I remember growing up. He played for North Melbourne and he played for East Perth. And my mum used to joke, don't ever marry a footballer, which was really interesting. I've never actually sat there and said, oh, what did you mean by that? Or were you being serious? I literally just took it as a joke. And I have 3 sisters as well, so I don't even know if they remember that story. But what is really interesting to me, as I ended up marrying a footballer, and I was thinking, was I rebelling against my mum's programming, or was she joking, or was that the energy of, okay, this was a joke and the footballers are great, or I want to marry someone like my dad. I wanted to step out and have this idea, I saw my mum and dad, I idolized them. Although they did separate when I was 13, I still idolized them and had a beautiful relationship with them both. And what was really interesting when I reflect on my personal programming, which is, I lived in the western suburbs, which is a beautiful, affluent place here in Perth, WA. I, wanted lots of babies. I wanted a beautiful looking husband. I wanted the house. I wanted the white picket fence. I wanted it all. But also I know from reflection is I started my personal development journey when I was in my teens. So I really did start to get to know myself. And I knew early on that authentically, I wanted to be a wife. I wanted to be a mother. I wanted to be I wanted to be a one-man woman. So I know that authentically all these things that I chased was really what my heart wanted. But what happens over the years, and I know we can only do so much personal growth as a teen. I mean, we haven't been through that much of life yet. So a lot of my personal growth journey sort of is showing up for me now, or in the past 10 years. It didn't show up for me a lot in my 20s, or maybe it did and I just didn't realize. But what does actually happen when you have this dream, and this authentic dream it could be, and this fantasy, and you feel the wheels start to fall off, you grip tightly to that dream. Even when your soul's whispering, this isn't it. And what is interesting to me about that is I get to see the places where I started to abandon myself. And this is not a story of blame, and this is not a story of victim. This is not a story of, he did that, so I did this. But this is a story of empowerment, because what happens when we have this fantasy and we have this dream and we start to get a sniff or an idea that this is actually going to come to fruition, we don't see the red flags. You just ignore them. You shut your mouth to keep the peace, and you start dimming your light. And I know for me, there were many red flags even before I got married. This is, again, I want to preface, I'm not saying that I would have changed absolutely anything in my past. I'm so grateful for everything that I went through. I'm so grateful that I said yes to that man. I'm so grateful that I had my children. But as a 42-year-old Rayne now, who has done some very, very deep personal growth work, the beauty about this is I get to be really radically honest with myself. And radically honest was that I held that fantasy of what I wanted over and above everything else. which did have the red flags ignored. And if you go back, or if I go back, I can see these flags. As I said before I got married, I can see these flags when I was pregnant with my first child. And when the fantasy is so strong, you just shut your mouth and keep going. You just keep the peace. You dim your light, you ignore, you put your head in the sand. And this is something that I see so many people actually walk through, and we abandon ourselves along the way. Now, if I had have understood the process of the future is just a made up thing in our mind, that it's an expectation that we put on ourselves and we put on what we want. If I had have known this at the time, what we get to do is bring ourselves back to present. And instead of sitting in the shame or guilt and the decision of the yes and the no, we get to go, okay, so that is what I intend. It is not happening. Let's bring it back to the present moment. How can I show up right now? I'm going to allow myself to grieve what isn't coming to fruition so that I can be really intentional and really present and pivot into, is this right? Is this not right? And if we want it to be right, how do I show up now with the information and the situation that I have right now? How can I show up the best version of me? But what happens is the nervous system wants to hold on to that fantasy, and it will white knuckle everything. Because what happens is when we make that fantasy the life that we want to live, when we keep showing up that way, when life is predictable, the nervous system feels safe. So it will bypass everything else that it needs to feel in order to have this predictable day to day. This is what you wanted. This is what you wanted. This is what we're working towards. The predictability of the fantasy that you're working towards, it makes you feel safe. So to actually bring back to the present moment and to feel the story that you're in now, which maybe the wheels are falling off, the red flags are coming, I'm avoiding, I'm putting my head in the sand, is a really uncomfortable place to feel. So we avoid and we keep going and we keep white knuckling, because that feels safer than actually allowing ourselves to be exactly where we're at in those moments. So when we make fantasy our purpose, when we make the thing that we're striving for our purpose for why and how we're showing up, so what can happen over time is that your nervous system starts to confuse predictability for purpose. So even when you're unhappy, even when you're shrinking to fit in, if your purpose is to, be a mother, if your purpose is to be a wife, if your purpose is to keep the house, if your purpose is your career, your purpose becomes the reason why you hold on, and the reason why we also lose ourselves in the outcome. Because the nervous system wants life to be predictable. It wants us to feel like we know that is the outcome, that is certainty. Your brain actually wants certainty. And when there is no certainty, we look for purpose. But in the roadmap of getting to that purpose, if the only thing that we're doing is focusing on the outcome that they want, the outcome that we're expected to have, the predictability of that is where we stay safe. It's also where we become really unstuck. And I know the story of being a mother. My purpose is to be a mother. Even that statement, it negates everything else that goes on in our lives. It negates our own happiness, our own fulfillment, our own intimacy in our marriage, our own, striving or ambition for our career, whether that's to be the stay-at-home mum or whether that's to actually build a career. We actually forfeit ourselves for our purpose. And then one day, let's say it's motherhood, we realize that motherhood isn't enough. What if my purpose to be a mother, and the reason why I've abandoned all the other stages in my life, what if I wake up one day and go, this just isn't enough? Motherhood isn't enough. Being a wife isn't enough. Having a career, like fill in the blank for you, it doesn't have to be motherhood. It could be your career. and you've let everything else go. We've abandoned everything else in our life. What happens when the nervous system makes your purpose the only thing that you're striving for and everything goes? That predictability is driving your life, and you wake up and you think this just isn't enough, right? It doesn't make you a bad mum, doesn't make you a bad wife or a selfish wife. But what happens if we don't look at this process as we move through, that we allow ourselves to abandon all the things that make us who we are along the way for this purpose-driven life, we do leave empty, gaping holes. And it's also from that state that it's easy for us to blame, to point fingers, to say, you're not giving me this, you don't make me happy, I don't love you, this career, my boss is this, right? When we are not in our bodies and in our responsibility for where we're at, when we're only in our purpose, I'm going to be a mother because that's going to make me feel good, I'm going to be a wife because that's my job, I'm going to build this career because I need the status. When we're only in that purpose, we're not owning anything else that happens along the beautiful trajectory of our life. We're abandoning that to make us mean something about ourselves. And let me tell you something about motherhood. And I'm going to come to this motherhood because I know this is what I talk to so many women about. Your children are not your whole self. Your children are not your life. We don't live for our children. That is a statement that is made to give us permission to not look at where we're at, not take responsibility for where we're at. You are allowed to grow up with your children, not just for your children. Do not self-abandon your dreams, your goals, your authenticity in the process. Do not abandon all the things that actually make your heart sing. Yes, your children can be part of your happiness and part of your purpose and part of your joy, but it is not the whole picture. And also, one thing that I would like to say about that is that when we live in that way, when we live the purpose that we live is for our children, and we neglect everything else in our life, we put that pressure on our children to be that for us. We put that pressure on our children to be happy for us. We're not happy unless you're happy. Are you happy? That makes me happy. It is actually a really, I don't want to use the word toxic because I find that's really harsh, but it is a really negative cycle that we can go on. And when we look at it that way, when we look at if our purpose is our children, we're putting pressure on them to be happy so that we can be happy. I'm not happy unless you're happy. My happiness is in you. That pressure that they feel to make mum proud, it completely also detaches them from their responsibility for their happiness. And this is what we're getting back to. What we want to get back to in being able to feel our grief, to be able to feel our unhappiness, to be able to feel our unfulfillment or our disappointment in ourselves, is our ability to bring us back to ground zero in this present moment and simply ask ourselves, who am I? What am I feeling? And how am I going to work with myself to meet my level of expectation that I authentically want? Not what society wants from me, but what I authentically want. So in this process of bringing yourself back to presence, in this process of going, who am I and where am I at? We have to understand that some roles, identities, or dreams that we have either been programmed or that we've been chasing for our whole lives, some of them actually no longer fit. And which is really interesting because a lot of the stories that I hear from couples when we're doing couples work is you've changed, she changed, he changed. And when we again let go of that notion, right? Let's talk about predictability. Let's talk about certainty. Let's talk about this dream, right? We have this dream, but someone in the story is changing, right? We feel unsafe in that change because that's unpredictable for our nervous system. But when we're really, really honest with ourselves, we are put in this lifetime to grow and move and change, right? And if you can understand, and this is what we're doing about self-awareness, that your nervous system doesn't like change, when we can understand that our nervous system likes predictability, that it feels unsafe to change or to see someone change, what happens is we don't allow ourselves to move and pivot and roll with the times. We're gripping onto that story that we wanted that may or may not be happening anymore. And we make it mean something about ourselves. So what does happen when those roles, identities, or dreams like no longer fit or someone's changing? We must practice, and this is the self-assessment practice in your body in the present moment, the ability to detach, to release what no longer serves you, to release what no longer belongs. And in that detachment, this is why we call it grief. We can detach from the fantasy, detach from the story, but lovingly go, okay, this is where I'm at now. The grief is in I'm not feeling like this is where it's going. So how do I pull myself back to center in these moments to become the woman that I'm really thriving or really desiring to become? Who do I desire to be now in amongst this change? Because we're allowed to still love something but outgrow it or the person. We're allowed to still love being a mother but outgrow just being a mother. We're allowed to love being a wife but outgrow our role in that marriage. And again, this is not saying, oh, we're going to leave. This is the ability to communicate, the ability to be center and have the conversation of, hey, I know that this is how it's been. I can feel my body wanting change, and having that conversation to how can we hold me? How can we hold me in these moments of change? Because I am now, instead of sitting in the shame and guilt for wanting the change, the shame and guilt for wanting more than being a mother or more than being a wife, instead of sitting there, I'm going to allow myself to grieve the fact that that's not my path anymore. And I'm going to pivot into something that really feels good and really lights me up. It's okay to love without holding on too tightly. We must learn how to let go and how to detach without holding on and without gripping on, because that grip says, I don't trust where this is going. This grip says, I am going to hold on to my guilt for wanting change, and I'm going to allow myself to project from that space. Interestingly, again, when we're looking at certainty, we don't need a master plan. You don't need to have this, I know exactly where this is going. The longevity of relationships is not, yes, it is, okay, let me rephrase that. There's ways that relationships, I believe, become long, 50 years. There's one part of that people just ignore and put their head in the sand and just, pretend like something's going on. Someone has done that in the marriage. And the other one is by people bringing back to present. How do we grow from this moment? Our dreams and fantasies may have changed. How do we grow from this moment? How are we now? Are we evolving? This is not about evolving together, but this is about holding space for your partner in their evolution and allowing them to do that, detaching from who you think that they need to be to make you happy and focusing on who you need to be to make you happy. So the master plan, this big picture, this fantasy that we think is going to make us happy and maybe doesn't, we don't actually need to hold on to. The practice is in holding on to what we need is one honest next step. Presence. Because it's in the expectations that we find the guilt and the shame. So how do we let go of this life without holding on to guilt or shame? One interesting part about all of this as well is let's talk about when we do hold on to guilt and shame. When we hold on to guilt and shame, we've maybe made the decision to go. We've made the decision that we have to leave this toxic relationship. And we take that guilt and shame with us onto the next 10 years. What do you think you're attracting when you hold on to shame and guilt, when you are projecting from that place? We are scared to step in. We keep our hearts closed. We tell the universe that we are not worthy because we fucked it up the last time. When we're holding on to shame or guilt, when we are not present, when we haven't grieved the life that we thought was going to make us happy and met us where we're at, we continue to experience the same feelings over and over again. And this is where I see so many people scared to step into new relationships, scared to start going out on dates again. Because the key to that is they're holding on to the shame and guilt of what could have been, not what actually is. And it's those shackles, those what could have been shackles, that are going to keep you cemented to the space that you are in right now. It's going to keep the same kind of man rocking up into your world over and over again to remind you of your shame and remind you of your guilt, right? So the practice is in letting go of the shame and guilt, understanding your stories, meeting yourself exactly where you're at, by admitting where you really are. Get safe in your body. Be willing to not have all the answers. Follow those micro clues that are guiding you towards something that is more present, something that is more full, something that is more real. Let go of the timelines of I should be doing this. I should be further along. I should have tried. I should have not done this. I should have made the decision. I can't believe I waited this long. Let go of the timelines and the shoulds, okay? And start leading your life like you actually matter, because you do. When we lead our life from a place of I matter, we get to start experiencing the joy and the happiness that we deserve. We get to start experiencing it from our inner world and not experiencing it from the validation of our children, of our husbands, of society. We get to experience from the inner world, not tainted by shame and guilt for what could, should, or maybe might have been. But you have to decide to bring yourself back to presence. You have to decide that no matter what, you're going to start allowing yourself to feel. And the biggest key to this is you have to decide that you're going to start taking radical self-responsibility for your life exactly where it's at right now. So you actually get to decide who you're becoming in this process, the kind of woman that you want to show up as, what your goals, desires, dreams, not what society, not expectations, not what you're programmed, but who are you and what do you actually want? How do I become the woman that you maybe never had or that you never knew? You cannot create the life you want from survival. You cannot create the life you want from shame or guilt. We must meet ourselves where we're at. And this is where the self-mothering, the reparenting, the part of your journey, understanding who you are and grieving the shifts that are happening in your life is what will start to open up your ability to answer those questions. When we become our own soft place to land, this is the bravest thing that you can ever do. Because I'm telling you now, you are not here to perform your life. You are not here to perform someone else's story. You are here to live your life. So your purpose, your commitment has to be becoming the woman that you want to be, becoming the woman possibly that you've never been or that you haven't really met. But I want to drive this one home. In this process, you cannot create the life you want from fight or flight. You cannot create it from survival mode. What we must do is understand that the self-mothering part, the reparenting part of you, the one who's grieving and shifting, she gets to decide, who am I as a woman? And what do I actually want? Not who do I want to be with, what kind of career do I want, how do I want to feel, and how do I want to show up every day? Is the mothering role, like how do I want that to actually look for me? Not what society wants, not what your parents expect, not what your partner expects, but what do I want? The career, what does that feel like for me? The marriage, how do I want to feel in this marriage? Because the tests come not from seeking outside of yourself to give you validation to do that, but becoming that woman inside of the current reality that you're living. Becoming your own soft place to land is the bravest thing that you'll ever do. Because we are not here to perform our lives for others. We are not here to live in a performance. We are here to live our life. And we don't actually have to earn our worth from society, from our partners, from our parents, or to live up to our own expectations of what we think society wants from us. You never did have to earn your worth. You never did. So you get to ask yourself, in what part of my life have I convinced myself that this is what should be making me happy? What part of my life have I convinced myself that showing up in this way is all that there is, and that's all that I am supposed to be doing? What part of that is sitting with you right now? And are you willing to tell the truth, like the real truth about it, even if it hurts? Are you willing to stop avoiding asking yourselves these questions? Are you willing to stop avoiding having these conversations? Are you willing to actually start grieving when things aren't working out the way that you wanted or you thought that they should? Because it's in these moments that you get to check in with yourself and say, what is my part in all this? But we can't actually do that when we're in fight, flight, shame and guilt, when we're in survival mode. We have to stop, take a deep breath, and pluck the courage up to actually say, hey, I'm unhappy. I'm feeling like something's not working here. What does this look like for me now? Because the answers that you seek are already inside of you. The answers that you seek are here in your heart. They're not out there. The happiness is not out there. The validation is not going to make you happy. The life that you thought was going to make you happy didn't. So what are we left with? We're left with ourselves. And if there's one thing that I know deeply, it's that we all want to experience joy. But joy doesn't have to be just the reward. Joy can be part of the life. Joy can be part of the journey. Joy can be it can be your companion. Joy can live alongside grief. It can live alongside uncertainty. Joy can live alongside confusion and resentment. Joy can actually live alongside letting go. But joy is that place that, yes, we are seeking, but we're so scared to feel what's going in the moment that we completely block it from being able to enter into our sphere. And if the purpose is to live a life of joy, if the purpose is to find the joy, we must surrender to the fact that it can live alongside your healing. Joy can live alongside all of the things that you have to go through. This doesn't have to be the destination, or it can't be the destination. It's not the reward. It's the companion that you get to feel. And if you are blocking the grief, if you're blocking the hard emotions, you are also blocking your ability to feel joy and elation and experience the highest of highs. Because if we don't allow ourselves to experience the lowest of lows, you'll never experience your heart open enough to feel what the highest of highs is really going to enrich your life. If there's one thing that I would want you to take away from this episode, it's that grief really needs to be met. And if grief isn't met, it follows you. If you do not meet the grief of the expectation that you would be happy if you achieved X, it will follow you around. The world is your mirror, and it will reflect back to you the grief, the guilt, and the shame that you are holding inside. And you end up becoming a slave to this guilt. You're trying to rebuild with shame, trying to be real. What I really want you to take from this episode is that grief needs to be met. When we don't meet our grief, it follows us around. And the world will be your mirror. It will reflect back to you your grief, your guilt, and your shame that you're holding on the inside and dragging around with you. You actually become a slave to your guilt when you don't meet yourself where you're at. Trying to rebuild with shame on your heart is like trying to rebuild a house on sand. It just has no stability. You get to heal within the space you are holding now. And if you've left that space, you get to heal wherever you're at right now too. The grief is not the dead end, but if looked at correctly, it is your doorway to healing. You're not lost. You are actually evolving, and it's such a beautiful place to be. And I really hope that in all this, I've opened up the conversation for you to say, can I meet myself in my grief? Am I willing to let go of my shame and guilt? And can I make the commitment to be radically honest with myself about how I'm feeling so that I can create the most joyous, connected, intentional life moving forward? Because that is exactly what you deserve. And I really hope you believe that. Now, my request to you is this. If this conversation has stirred something in you, if you know someone that is needing to actually go through this grief process, please pass on this episode. I'd love it if you subscribe to this podcast. Take a photo, put it up on Instagram, and I'll reshare it. If you're ready to walk through this grief, if you're ready to meet yourself where you're at, I would just want to share this message. So please do me that solid if you've learned something today and pass this on to someone that could really enjoy having the opportunity to light their life up. I have some one-on-one group coaching, I have group coaching programs, and I also have in-person workshops. So if this is something that interests you, if you are looking to transform your life, if you're looking to step through the grief and need support whilst doing that, please reach out because I would love to connect with you. I'll see you next week.